Hey guys, this is Dave with Gazaudio. Today we're going to be taking a look at the new Hiby R6 Pro 2, or Gen 2. This is a revision of the Hiby R6 Pro that I believe was released back in 2019. So of course, this Generation 2 variant is going to have some significant upgrades over its older predecessor. But how does it compare to some of the newer, more recent releases under or around $1,000, like the M11 Plus, the M15S, or even some of Hiby's own recent, less expensive releases like the R6 Gen 3 or my go-to RS2? Well, those are some of the questions I want to attempt to answer for you. So we'll go over the design, specifications, features, and then we'll talk about the sound, and finally do some comparisons and try to determine where the R6 Pro 2 stands among the competition. But first, let's go over what's included in the box with the R6 Pro 2. Of course, we have the DAP itself. It also includes a very cool purple case that nicely complements the design of the DAP itself. If you get the black version of the DAP, I believe it comes with a gray case. It also comes with screen protectors for both the front and the glass portion on the back of the device, a USB Type-C to Type-A adapter, and a USB Type-C to Type-C cable. As for inputs, outputs, buttons, and knobs, on the bottom we have both independent 4.4 balanced and 3.5 single-ended line out, and also independent 4.4 balanced and 3.5 single-ended headphone outputs. And then we have a Type-C input. On the left side, there are playback controls and a micro USB slot. On the right, there's an audio format indicator light, a power button, and a volume control. It did take me a little getting used to the button placement, but after using it for a while, I was able to use it just fine. It has a large 5.9-inch display, which gives you a full 1080p experience, and as you can see, it's not bezel-less, but it does go nearly all the way to the edge. As for the aesthetics and the build, it's awesome, period. This is arguably one of the coolest looking DAPs under $1,000, in my opinion, of course. And typically I'm not a huge fan of purple, but when it looks this cool, I will gladly make an exception. The use of both glass and the metal on the back combined with the curved lines and the angled cuts, it's simply stunning. The build quality is also very good at this price point, but I wouldn't expect anything less from Hiby. So we've covered the outside of the R6 Pro 2, but what about the inside? Well, this is where things start to get good because it uses an AK4191 in combination with dual AK4499EX DAC chips. They're configured in what is referred to as an all-in architecture, and it decodes all the way up to PCM 1536 32-bit and DSD 1024, which is the highest you can go. It also has all of your standard wireless connections like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5.0, and the Bluetooth is two-way, so it can both send and receive a Bluetooth signal. As for Bluetooth codecs, it can decode UAT, LDAC, aptX, aptX HD, AAC, and SBC. It also supports audio over Wi-Fi, so you can use AirPlay, DLNA, or the Hiby Link feature. As for power output, the R6 Pro gives you 125 milliwatts out of the 3.5 output and 383 milliwatts out of the 4.4. And while that doesn't sound like a lot of power, it actually performs quite well with all of my full-size headphones. And of course, it has more than enough power for all of my IEMs. Some planar driver headphones might require a little more power, but otherwise I think it should handle most other full-size headphones quite well. The R6 Pro Gen 2 has a 5,000 milliamp battery, and battery life will vary depending on which output you're using and also which amp mode you're in. So if you are using the 3.5 output in Class AB mode, you should get about 8 hours of playback time, and in Class A mode, about 7 hours of playback time. And if you're using the 4.4 output in Class AB mode, you're looking at probably about 6 hours of playback time. In Class A mode, about 5 hours of playback time. Now, apparently this was a concern for some in the community, and Hiby's explanation was that essentially much of the power is dedicated to the device's all-in architecture DAC circuit. So you're going to sacrifice battery life, but you're going to get increased sound quality. Now, on the processing side, it has 4 gigs of RAM and uses a Snapdragon 665 processor, which is not the fastest out there, but it's definitely adequate for this application. It also offers 64 gigs of internal memory, and with the included micro SD card slot, you can expand the memory even further further up to an additional 2 terabytes. On the UI side, the R6 Pro 2 offers Android 12, which definitely provides a much smoother and user-friendly experience. The pull-down quick panel gives you access to all of your basic wireless connections and audio settings, including the option to toggle between low, medium, and high gain. It also allows you to change between Class A and Class AB amplifier mode. And it gives you direct access to your additional audio settings. And then within the audio settings themselves, you have access to a ton of great tweaks, including some plugins, which you can download. And then, of course, like most of Hiby's other DAPs, you have access to the MSEB settings, which offers more than enough tweaks to satisfy almost anybody. Okay, let's move on to the sound. Okay, let's talk about the sound of the Hiby R6 Pro 2. Now, while I did spend some time doing some tweaking with the MSEB settings, most of my testing was done in its default mode with the MSEB settings disabled. So we talked about its all-in architecture and how you might have to sacrifice some battery life. And I understand how that could be an issue for some, but for me personally, since I don't generally travel long distances, I don't really need it to last much longer than 5 or 6 hours. And if I do go on a long trip, I'll just take a different DAP that has better battery life. But my point is I'm okay with that trade-off as long as the sound improvement is significant. And my guess is most consumers will probably feel the same way. But the question is, how significant is the improvement? Well, I'll tell you right now that in terms of pure sound performance, this is probably the best sounding DAP that I've heard or owned under $1,000. And of what I own right now, it's bested only by my reference player, the M15S. And it has now become my second most used DAP, followed very closely by the RS2. And again, the M15S is still my go-to DAP for most testing. Now, as usual, I tested the R6 Pro 2 with lots of different IEMs and headphones, trying to assess not only its general sound presentation, detail retrieval capabilities, and just how transparent it is, but also testing its driving capabilities and its background noise levels. And just to clarify, because of where the R6 Pro 2 is priced, it's technically considered to be a mid-tier level DAP. And I've had quite a few of those over the years and still have quite a few now, but there's definitely something special about this one. And I did do some pretty extensive comparing between Class AB mode and Class A mode. And there is a difference, but honestly, AB mode sounds almost as good in almost every regard, especially with IEMs. But basically, Class A mode gives you slightly better dynamics. And since I was mostly testing it at home, I wasn't worried about how it would affect battery life, so I just did much of my testing in Class A mode. But again, AB mode has a nearly identical overall presentation in my opinion, maybe just slightly less colored and slightly less dynamic sounding. But in regards to the sound of the R6 Pro 2, its general sound presentation is what I would consider to be neutral, but it does lean slightly warm. So while I would consider it to be mostly linear, I do think it falls a little bit more towards the musical side, but also delivers way more detail that I could ever ask for at this price point. The bass has really good extension and dynamics, especially in Class A mode. The mid bass is punchy, it's controlled, but also delivers really good mid bass and low mid texture. And then as you move into the low mids and mids, male vocals and some instruments have a nice, rich presentation and a nice note weight. And one of the characteristics that stood out to me was simply how natural everything sounded. So pianos, horns, guitars, male and female vocals all sounded so natural and simply real. That's the best way I know how to describe it. And This is where I really started to realize just how special the R6 Pro 2 was and how close it came to the performance of my M15S. And that same level of refinement and control carried through into the treble as well. And it was just really smooth and controlled, but also maintained really good levels of treble detail, giving cymbals, hi-hats, good levels of energy, but never sounding harsh or unnatural, and just had an overall nice, smooth, natural presentation. And as for overall detail levels, the R6 Pro 2 has excellent detail and clarity. It actually surpasses almost all of my other mid-tier DAPs and pushes incredibly close again to the levels of my M15S. And I say almost because the detail levels of the M11 Plus are just about on par with the R6 Pro 2. However, the R6 Pro 2's presentation seems to be just a little more refined. I did hear some similarities in their dynamics, especially with the R6 Pro 2 in Class A mode, but the R6 Pro 2 just seemed to present everything with just a little more smoothness and polish. In regards to background noise, of course, I tested the R6 Pro 2 with my 2020 Andromedas and heard no background hiss at all. So the background is about as black as I've heard on any device. So I've already compared the R6 Pro 2 with the M11 Plus and a little bit with my M15S, but where does it land in terms of overall performance when compared to some of the other less expensive mid-tier level DAPs like my R6 Gen 3 or RS2? We'll start with the R6 Gen 3. So the R6 Gen 3 also has what I would consider to be a neutral warm signature. So in that sense, there are some similarities in its general sound presentation, but where the R6 Gen 3 falls behind is in dynamics and overall detail retrieval. The R6 Pro 2 simply offers a more refined, more detailed, and more dynamic presentation, in my opinion. And then we have my beloved RS2, which I've saved for last because if you've watched any of my more recent DAP reviews, you'll know that this is kind of one of my other favorite mid-tier DAPs because of its unique R2R sound. And I have to say, I absolutely love this thing. Now, if I were to only compare the R2R to the R6 Pro 2 and only go by my typical standards or metrics for judging what makes a DAP technically good, so it's transparency, detail, dynamics, then the R6 Pro 2 wins every time because it's simply a better device and it offers better sonic performance. However, the RS2 R2R sound is very unique, and there are times when I'll plug into one DAP or DAC after another, even my better desktop stacks. And as good as all of those are, there are lots of times when I still just want to hear that incredibly natural tonality that the RS2 has. But again, by my normal standards, the R6 Pro 2 is technically the better performer. Now, as for whether or not I recommend the R6 Pro 2, while I do wish they would have bumped up the power output just a little bit more, in almost every other regard, the R6 Pro 2 performs way above its price point, not to mention the design and build are simply excellent. So the R6 Pro 2 does get my recommendation. So that concludes my review of the Hiby R6 Pro 2. If you're new to the Gazaudio channel and you like our videos, please take a minute and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to go a step further, you can also support us through our Patreon. I'll be sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this review. Please like this video, please share this video. I hope you have an awesome day.